Hi there, welcome to the More Civil Podcast. This is a podcast for Blacks, Asians, and those who love them. I am Mo, and I am your host, ready to spark your curiosity as I take you on this adventurous ride of exploring cultures through the stories of my guests from all over the world. On this show, we get really personal, discussing salient issues that are relevant to our contemporary age and also building community around them. As our guests exercise courage and vulnerability in sharing their life's experiences, we hope that in turn you are inspired by them and that you get the courage needed to set your own stories free. Enjoy the ride, and thank you so much for listening. Hello everyone, welcome back to the show. We are at a critical point in American history where the country is divided on racial and political lines. And as at the time of this recording, there's been a spate of targeted crimes against Asians in the US. And to explore the issue of identity and also of, acceptance and cultural curiosity, I could not think of a better person to navigate this discussion with me today on the show. In her book, Too Much Soul, Miss Cindy Wilson, the author challenges us to question the flawed concept of race and how, at the end of the day, what we are on the outside isn't what binds us. It is rather our shared experiences, navigating the complexity of the human condition that brings us together. Sounds familiar? Yes. This is the very ethos of the show and myself as a host. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Miss Wilson to the podcast. Hello, Cindy.
Hello, Mo. Thank you for having me on. And that was a great introduction. I loved it.
My pleasure. And so I found you on Skycedi's YouTube channel. So guys, go listen to that. We might gloss over some of the things she spoke about there. So that way you guys can give, Skycedi credit for doing such a wonderful interview. But just for the sake of those that, haven't gotten to watch, Skycedi's interview, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a transracial adoptee, and my name is Cindy Wilson, and I was born in Seoul, Korea. And maybe when I was a few months old, I was given up for adoption. And so I was at an orphanage. My adopted parents at the time were stationed in the Army. And so my mom had a lot of miscarriages. So at the time, she thought she couldn't have any children. So being there, and if you know anything about Korean adoption, it's the highest international adoption population. So during the time she was there, it was almost easy access to be able to adopt a child because it brought so much revenue to their government. And so she was like, well, let's just look into this. And they were able to adopt me. And we probably stayed about a year. And again, I was only a couple months old, so I don't remember living there at all. And I mean, my mom tells me stories about it and she loved it. But we ended up moving back to the States. And we moved to Chicago. And 3 years after they adopted me, my brother was born. His name is Adrian. Yeah. So he's African-American or Black. And after that, we moved to Winston-Salem, North Carolina, where my parents, they ended up getting a divorce. So I was 7 years old when my mom, my brother, and myself moved to Jackson, Mississippi. And living around military families up to that point, it was very diverse. So nobody pointed out the fact that I look different. I look different from my family. That was just not anything I had to think about or I had to even consider. And so when I moved to Jackson, it's not very diverse. It's a lot of Black people and it's a lot of white people. I only knew 2 other Asian people growing up in Jackson. They were both Chinese. I'm Korean. Everybody called me Chinese. And I'm like, there's more than one ethnicity of Asian people. So that was always interesting. And then just the constant bullying, being picked on was just really, for me, exhausting. It was like just being an easy target. And I think that's what we're seeing now, just that resurgence of like, just how words can empower, and like just from somebody calling it the China virus or the Kung flu, and people taking that and knowing, that now at this point they can make, we're like an easy target. Or if you look at the resurgence of like just Asian hate over this past year, really most of the people that have been targeted have been older and women. Yes. And it's like, how cowardly is that, you feel the need to, one, target people and be verbally and physically, harmful towards them. But not only that, but they're older and they're women, like 68% of them are women, so it just goes to show like just how cowardly some people's actions are, especially when it comes to racism. It's just ridiculous. So I digress, but so it's like it really triggers what's going on now. A lot of what I had to deal with at a young age of being constantly targeted and picked on and bullied only because of the shape of my eyes, which is like ridiculous, so it was something I couldn't control, something, like I couldn't fix per se, so I tried to, for me growing up, like not bring a lot of attention to my Asianness, and somebody asked me at a speaking engagement I had, they were like, well, do you think that you lean more into Black culture so you weren't picked on, so people wouldn't pick on you as much? And I never thought about that before. And I mean, one, naturally, because that was my environment, of course, that's why I leaned into that. But then, like you hear about other Asian people, whether they're adopted or not, and they typically tend to lean into like more white, culture, or like the things that they do to kind of take that target off of themselves. So for me at a really young age, it just developed like identity issues, where it was really hard for me to just accept myself and love myself for who I was, because for me at a young age, it's like you equate being different to not being good. So it's like, you just want to do anything just to fit in and be accepted. And so again, it's like for me throughout the years, I've really had to work on, really being more accepting and loving the person that I am, That went on for a long time, like where I was like physically having to fight people in order just to get respect and let people know, look, like you are not going to mess, and then like, I'm probably a little crazy in the head too. So I'm like, windmill, like that you come from me. But then kind of transitioning from that to like, it's like, all right, like if you come for me, like I might not physically fight you because there are consequences, but I'm
yeah.
And it's like, I'm not going to start it, but if you start it, I'll finish it. So let's that. So, but then like just even getting older, it's like you realize the impact that words have, right? And how they can affect who we are as individuals. And it really gets into the soul of who we are and like causes trauma that we have to try to heal from and fix like as we get older. And so I didn't want to be that person to other people, so I just had to really lean into like developing my own self-confidence and again, like it's been a lot of work. Like I still have to do that daily, even now, it's like I will rock like a, it's an honor to be Asian, a quote from like Sandra Oh, but like sometimes thinking about where I'm going and like, is that going to make me a target? Or like if I wear like my Korean hoodie, from another company, it's like, is that going to make me a target?
Yeah.
Instead of just being like, I don't care, So, but because of the times that we're living in, it's like, those are the things that I have to think about. So, Then I went to an HBCU, which is a historically Black college and university. Yeah. And so that was a great experience, you know. Like, even though I'm not Black, I always tell people that are especially, you know, younger kids, like, that are Black, like, if you have the opportunity, go, you know. And it's like, you hear, I would hear like other Black people say, you know what, like, I'm going to go to PWI because I want to be prepared for the real world.
Yeah.
And so my advice is like, listen, the real world is going to be out there. It's out there, whether you're in school or not or whatever. But it's like, if you can have that time to just be somewhere where you're celebrated, you know, and like, you don't have, like, racism isn't the thing you have to worry about. You just have to worry about passing your classes, right? It just, you know, I think for me being in that type of environment, it really helped me and my self-esteem. So when I went on to the world, it was like I was very confident in who I was. And now it's like I've developed these friendships that down the road, they're like family for me, you know. So that was a great experience. Then I moved to Birmingham, Alabama, and that was great. I met a lot of wonderful, amazing, kind people, and it was weird, and it just showed me the trauma that I had from being picked on for so long, or bullied, or targeted. It was like moving there, people would be like, just, they wanted to hang out with me, and they wanted to be my friend, and I was like, I don't know you, like, why do you want to be my friend, you know, like, but and me and my best friend, we joke about it all the time, because I was like I would call my friends in Mississippi, and I would tell her, like, I'd be like, this lady, like, she's so, you know, like, she's so nice, she's so pretty, she's the doctor, like, I don't know why she wants to hang out with me, like, don't you think that's weird? My friends were like, yeah, but it was like, she just was nice, you know, and like, she didn't want anything from me. There was nothing I could give to her. And so it really just showed me how guarded I was.
You had been, yeah.
Foreign the concept of kindness and like people just, you know, really wanting to get to know you and be your friend was for me, you know?
Yeah.
And then about 10, 11 years ago, I moved to Atlanta. So that was like a huge transition period in my life, where before I never wanted to go to Korea. Then since moving here, it really, having that exposure to like Korean culture, the heritage, festivals, food, it really piqued that curiosity for me. But then that was interesting too, because it's just that, you know, I don't know if you've met other transracial adoptees, but when you're around, like, you're prescribed, you know, culture, heritage based on your ethnicity, you feel that imposter syndrome.
I've heard about that.
Yeah. So it's like, this is supposed to be a part of who I am, but it's not. Like, I didn't grow up around this, you know? And so me going to a restaurant and knowing maybe 10% of the things on the menu and just feeling that embarrassment, like, I feel like I should know more, but I just don't, you know? And so, but that again led to a more exploratory path for me. And since, you know, I've been to Korea twice, and that's been interesting because, you know, it's just a lot of pressure I put on myself. Like, what if I don't fit in? What if I don't feel accepted? But it was like, just go, just enjoy it, just see what it is. Immediately, I felt like I belonged there, because when you drive into Seoul, all you see is like chicken and beer signs. And I was like, wait a minute, where am I? Is this Jackson? Hold on, wait a minute. But then, like, when you're there, like, not only being a transracial adoptee, but also being American added another layer of, like, you know,
experiences. Yeah.
Yeah. Like people that I met there would be like, oh yeah, we can tell you're not Korean. And I was like, well, what does that mean? And they were like, just the way you do your makeup and how you dress. Like, they can tell you're not from here. And I remember I was in Starbucks and this lady walked in. Her shoes are like fabulous. And I was like, oh my gosh, look at her shoes. And I was like, oh my gosh, I love your shoes. And she just looked at me like, what are you doing? We don't do that here. Why are you shopping? Like, and and again, it was just like my American culture of just, and so it was like I had to learn to kind of pivot, how I'm used to being, to really be respectful of like their culture and how they live. But again, like the first time I went, I definitely was like, I don't feel like this is me per se. But then I went the next year to an international Korean adoptee conference, and then I met all these international, like Korean transracial adoptees, which was amazing. And a lot of the people I met, this was their first time going there. So for me, I was like, well, let's go here. I know all these other places I've already been to. And it was just so cool to be able to show them what I had already experienced, and just, somewhat feeling more of a connection, and like, this is like a part of me, but again, it's like, it's so hard, it's like when you're raised a certain way and you're so comfortable with a certain lifestyle, but then you have society that is like, no, this is
this is who you are, because
of how you look, and it's like, but that's not what I really relate to. So it's like, for me, I'm still on this journey of learning more about my Korean culture and heritage, but like, I'm learning, right? But that's not me, and that's not how I was raised. That's not what I was exposed to. That wasn't what has shaped, like, it may shape me down the line, but it's not what has shaped me up to this point of who I am. So.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much for that. I loved your book. So she wrote a book called Too Much So, which, I'm holding up right now. And the way I read it was almost like I was reading her diary that she made, accessible to the public. And there's so many themes that I, elicited from your book. I think one of the biggest thing was identity. You spoke about your grandfather, for example, and how you and your brother, you would go, Adrian, you would, ransack the house, he would cook, and you described his presence. And I could just imagine how that also, the legacy he left behind helped you really stay so grounded. Because I believe that, the issue of bullying in schools, if the parental front, like at home, if children were more secured and they knew who they were, bullying might not be that, impactful on them, in school. Because a lot of kids seek for that peer validation. And I could tell from your book that you really knew who you were, because your parents, it seemed like they didn't treat you any differently. They didn't, even hanging out like in church with, your grandparents' church that you spoke about. And so I love that. And I think it really shows in your process as well. Like you're really securing your identity. And for you to want to even explore your Korean heritage, it's more like a bonus for you. It's like, you know what, let's just, explore this. But you already know who you are. It really didn't really matter much. So I was going to ask you this question. Your tagline is, I'm Korean, yet culturally Black. And, I know that most Black people or any Black person that reads that might want to roll their eyes, like, what does that even mean? Like, how dare you, So how do you navigate? You really talked about in your book, like a lot of people that give you flack were actually Blacks, but then eventually you guys became friends and, but initially they gave you the trouble the most. So how do you navigate, holding on to these two culturally rich identities, especially in a world, like you said, where people are so obsessed with categories and labels? What backlashes have you faced, if any, for identifying as a culturally Black person, despite, being phenotypically Asian? And how do you work around this?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. So, I mean, if anyone has followed me or kind of knows, some of me sharing my story, it's always interesting when people post that, like for some of the videos or interviews I've been in. And it's like, it's almost like clickbait, but it's like, still, it's my story. It's my truth. And so it's interesting because a lot of people, when they read it or when they hear my story, they're like, oh, okay. I mean, that makes sense. Like her parents are Black, you know, like a lot of people are like, oh, you're like Rachel Dolezal. I'm like, no, like my family is Black, you know, and it's like, and that was my environment that I grew up around. But my mom exposed us to a lot of other things too, you know, and not just Black culture. And so, but Black culture is what shaped me. Like when I think about certain movies or shows or music or food, like, you know, like what has influenced me is Black culture, you know? And then especially like just the woman that I am today, like I would be remiss if I didn't say that, like, I've been strongly influenced, especially by Black women, you know, that have made me into the strong woman that I am, you know, today. Like, I've never said I'm Black, you know, I'm like, I'm Asian, like, but, you know, again, like, I would be remiss if I did not, you know, and then if I didn't acknowledge that, then people be like, but her family's Black, like how she's not going to acknowledge, you know, that. So it's like, sometimes you can't win for losing, but you know what? My thing for me is like, this is my truth. This is my story. And one of the reasons why I wrote my book was because I wanted to rewrite my narrative, you know, instead of like people saying who I should, and like society, like it's so loud, you know, and it's so hard to be like who you are as an individual. And I totally get why people struggle with identity issues, and which was another reason why I wrote my book, because society is so loud when it speaks to how we should be as individuals based on how we look, you know, and it's like, people grow up in so many different environments, and you don't know the situations that they grew up in that has shaped them to be who they are and what has influenced them. And it's like really the only way to get to know that is to know their story, you know, to ask them and not judge a book by its cover, which it was like, you know, that's what I felt like I had to deal with all the time.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you noticed about me, but I started exploring Korean culture many years ago, and I began speaking it actually 4 years ago. And then
good. Well, yeah, it's hard. It's hard
coming from English and then to Korean. But I remember I used to struggle a lot because of just how do I explain to people that I love this culture. There's so many things being African that I've learned, you know, by navigating to Korean culture, like the love for food, the love for family, you know, family activity, your nationalism and all that. Oh my God, you know, the entertainment scene is, you know, killing it. But it was really my Korean friends that helped me, you know, get grounded. Like, we love that you love our country. Heck, you know a lot about our history than we do. And so, you know, and I think that theme was really, you know, reflected in your book of, you know, your interaction with Black people and just how that has really forged who you are. And it's what you are. It's not like you're trying to fake it. You were born into it. This is your family. This is your life. You know, it's your identity. I think
there's a difference between cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation.
Yes.
Like, you know, like I think, and I don't know Rachel Dolezal, but it's like, I love that she loves the Black community and that she's even taken on roles in the NAACP. But to me, that doesn't mean you have to dismiss who you are and how you were born, you know. So that's my only issue is like in your situation, like you're still who you are, but you have this love and appreciation for another culture that reminds you of your own.
Exactly.
And there's nothing wrong with that. But then
but people think that, you're being fake about it, like, you know, Korean boom, like, whatever.
And I think, you know, especially in communities of color, it's like we qualify each other, and it's like, you're not this.
So sad.
If you don't like this, you know, and it's like, if you like XYZ and other things outside of this, like, you're not one of us. And it's like, you know, it's like, that's not like, it's okay for people to like what they like, you know? It's
exactly.
Like, that's why we have like, and now it's like we're such a melting pot and we're exposed to so much more when it comes to food and culture. And, you know, it's like, I just, I would have hated, you know, I think because I am a transracial adoptee, like, and I tried to figure out my identity for so long that I'm so intrigued by other cultures and ethnicities, and I'm so just naturally curious. And it's like, like, is that more of like me and who I am, and it's like just learning about different cultures. Like there's so many things about each of them that are so similar, but they're so different. And it's like, why can't we just learn to appreciate that, making it separate us. Yeah.
Great. I always say there's that same but different thread that runs through all of us. Let's appreciate the differences and also, enjoy the sameness. We might do things differently, but at the end of the day, we all want to, belong and, feel a part of something. I have 3 more questions for you, and I hope we can rush through this because they're really good. So the first one is this. There's an assumption that is widely spread, about Korean adoptees, that they flourish in white middle, class families with like white picket fences, armed with a backpack of privileges. While this might hold through for some people, it's certainly not the same for everyone. And you're a prime example of those who fall in that latter category, because your book really shares, about growing up in Jackson, Mississippi and having just enough to get by. You were very explicit in explaining, just how difficult it was, the apartment you lived in and all that. Can you share a little bit more about this, especially to encourage listeners who may find it hard to rise above such humble beginnings? And I grew up similarly to you. My parents really have enough. Everything they had, they put into our education growing up in Nigeria. And I used to have a lot of complex, where I lived. But, I'm glad I'm where I am today and I thank God for it. But I imagine that some people are still stuck in that mentality of not having enough. How did you, overcome all of that?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good. I love your questions because they're so different. Like, I feel like I get a lot of the same questions. So, but you read the book, so I love that.
I read the book, and I wanted to do something differently and give other people to do something as well.
I love it. So that's a great question, and it's like, I think with adoption, a lot of people fairy tale it. Like, oh, that's so. I'm sure they love you and. You were loved, that they picked you and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, listen, there's some adoptees that have had great experiences. And there are some that I've met so many transracial adoptees that have had very traumatic experiences. Right. And like for me growing up, I'm like, can Oprah adopt me? You hear about these rich people adopting these kids, but it's like, my parents aren't rich, So I think for me, and I mean, we weren't by any means kind of just, there were times where it was like we were getting by, especially, my mom being a single mom, for a while. So I would say, now me and my brother and just even our friends, like when we grew up and and lived somewhat of that struggle life for a little while, it's like you look back at it and you appreciate it because it builds character. And then it's like it just really makes you to appreciate where you are now. It's like, that we had to make it off of XYZ. And now it's like, if I want to go to a nice restaurant or whatever, I can go and I can afford it myself, and I don't have to really just think twice about it. So it makes you, again, I feel like it builds character. It really helps you to appreciate and be grateful for the things that you have now. I think, too, it's like, it makes you almost work harder, but it's like there are other things, that kind of come with that too. It's like, that make me always feel like I'm trying to prove myself or,
exactly.
So it's like, there are some positives that come with it, but then there's some negatives too. Or it's like just that fear of not wanting to ever go back to that place and space again. And then, just trying to do better. I think the goal of every generation should be just to do better than the generation before.
For it, yeah.
Because it's like, I was never taught about finances and generational wealth or anything like that. And it's like now having more exposure and education to it, it's like, how do I create that for myself? How do I create that? I don't have any kids, but maybe for my niece, and to make sure that she's good when she gets older. You know, and like having conversations with my mom the other day, it's like, okay, listen, like this is what other people do. So they have that generational wealth. Like, we need to be on this, like, you know? And so it's like, you know, I think just, again, recreating that narrative. It's like, just because, you know, you're a person of color and this is how it's always been, doesn't mean that's always how it has to be.
Has to be. Thank you for that. And I think for me is learning how to be humble and looking past just, you know, material things and physical appearances. And I won't lie that, you know, everything is like the feeling of not feeling like I belong in most spaces has gone away. But I have to just keep reminding myself, it's the boogeyman. It's not real. It's not real. You're qualified to be here, you know?
Yeah. And, you know, like, even our parents' generation, you know, and for women, it's like you're taught to like get married and let a man take care of you. But then like my mom's generation, it's like, no, you go and you be independent and you should be able to do it yourself. But now I'm like, can I get a sugar daddy in the house? Like, I don't want to pay all the bills by myself. You know, but it's like too, it's like, you know, because our parents like are pushing us and like our generation to do better. Sometimes it's like, you know, it's like now that I'm older, it's like just the rat race of like corporate and then, you know, and it's like really to me, you know, like probably what I will instill in my niece is more, I mean, financially, you do want that freedom in a sense, but like, how do you get that smarter, but not harder? But where you also live a life where you can be free to be who you are. Because sometimes when you're in corporate and you're chasing that dollar to be financially, you know, do financially well. It's like it can burn you out, or, you know, like it can take away from like who you are and your identity and that freedom to be that, you know?
I agree. I think the key here is to balance yourself very well. Now, your book, the very first page, or maybe 2 pages down, we see that you dedicated, you know, your book to your niece. That's Adrian's daughter, Alexandria, who's biracial. And I mean, it sounds like she's really captured your heart. And I mean, heck, you dedicated the whole book to her. And I love that you shared your hopes to help her grow into a well-adjusted person. And having you as an aunt, I can imagine that you're going to prepare her, you know, to accept herself, you know, both as a Black and a white person, and all of the goodness and challenges that might abound in that space. The next question I'm going to ask you is a little bit, I want to say, tough, but let me see how I can dice it down. There's been some tense, racist-fueled historical events in the U.S. involving Asians. For example, in 1907, there was the Bellingham riots. In 1987, there was the Dot Busters, which was, you know, people that were targeting Indians with their bindi. In 1992, we had the, you know, LA riots in Koreatown, and most recently we've had a lot of attacks against Asian women in spas like in Atlanta, and, you know, even against elderly Asian men in other places like Oregon. Now, let's consider these issues on one hand. On the other hand, there also seems to be some segregation among Blacks and Asian Americans. And given the gains, we've made a lot of gains as Black people, even though there's still a long way to go in, you know, fighting for equality, leadership, occupying spaces. But there's not really been a lot of gain in improving inclusivity in leadership among Asian Americans. Heck, I read an article recently about how Asian Americans don't get, you know, these leadership positions because they're told to keep quiet, and, you know, but the only time they want to put them up is when there's a crisis, someone that can be like the fall guy, and that's really, really sad to hear. Now, why do you think Asian Americans are not given those equal visibility? And given how you have both cultural blends, what are your thoughts as to what is this cause of this tension? I know Blacks have some stereotypes against Asian people and vice versa, you know, and how can we, you know, improve the relationships between, you know, these two groups? And I'm not putting you as the authority on these issues because, you know, this is just experience, but as someone who has, you know, navigated those two spaces, what are some of your thoughts on, you know, these statements I've just made?
Yeah. So, okay. I think that, and, I'm a part of like an Asian employee resource group. And I'm, really vocal about, I think that there's an opportunity for us to have awareness and training that will help us to get promoted. But I'm also very cautious of us but I think there's a need for corporations to get training on Asian culture and just how Asian, communities tend to operate, that are very different, especially if they've come from Asian, families like immigrants, their families are immigrants, and so I'm really careful, like you said, the word balance, right? So like maybe there are some things that we have to learn to be able to get that promotion. But I think there's some things that our company needs to learn about us too. Like I don't think the burden should be on us to have to fully assimilate, and because then we're not being able to bring our full self to work. We're not able to be authentically who we are because you're wanting to make us into this clone of a person that is like not comfortable for us, So I think that's one thing. And I think your second question was like, how do we like just support one another or like,
Blacks and Asians? Because, we're minority groups and we've both been targeted, for different reasons. Yeah. But the end product is discrimination and, reduced opportunities to ascend to leadership roles.
Yeah, I think it's super, and I love that question because I think it's such a huge need right now. I think for so long that we have allowed society to pit us against one another. Like the model minority myth is a false narrative that was created to...
Amen, sis. Amen.
Yeah, it was like created to further divide us from other people of color to just get people of color to get in line. Like this is, if you're a minority, this is how you should behave in order to be accepted. And it's like, people are getting smarter and hip to that. And it's like, no, like, we don't have to conform and be XYZ. And it's like, I think that we keep falling under that system and that trap of like, of being putting ourselves against each other when we have to do a better job of listening to one another. And I think that, like just being on both sides of it, like with my family being Black and then me being Asian, like with everything that was happening with Black Lives Matter last year and being like either speaking on panels or listening to people, overwhelmingly what I heard from the Black community is listen. Like, listen to us and don't insert yourself. We've been saying a lot of this stuff for years and you have not listened, and then being on the other side of the coin of like, being a part of different Asian organizations and like me knowing what it means to be Asian, not because that's how I grew up and that was my household and that was my culture and that was my heritage, but solely based on how society has treated me, I'm able to relate to other Asian women and be like, oh yeah, I get that all the time too. The stereotypes, the bullying, the false narrative of the model myth minority, So it's like for us, like with everything that's been going on in our community, what I've seen overwhelmingly is that because, like I mentioned before, we're so used to not bringing a lot of attention on ourselves because we don't want to be a target. We don't typically talk about what we go through, right? And then sometimes, I do hear this too, that like other Asian people don't necessarily want to talk about it. They feel like it's disrespectful to communities of people that have gone through like worse things or more trauma. But it's like, hurt is hurt and pain is pain, and it's like racism for any group of individuals is freaking trauma, So it's like, if we were able to come together in unity and solidarity, we could get so much more accomplished together than separately. But the thing that really bothers me, and I've had even my friends say, I don't stand with Asian people, or like, I'm not like, why am I going to support Asian people? They don't support us. And I'm like, I cannot let you make that statement. One, me being your friend, and you know that, and it's like,
I support you
differently, right? And they're like, yeah, but you're different. And it's like, but I'm still Asian. And two, I know my Asian friends, other Asian community, are like programs and organizations that I follow, that I'm a member of, that stand in solidarity and have done things to help the Black community, and then vice versa. Like, I know Black people and Black organizations that have stood in solidarity and support of Asian people. So it's like, two things can exist. Asian people can be racist against Black people. Black people can be racist against Asian people. But another side of it can exist. Asian people, there are some Asian people that are out there that support Black people. And in a way where you would be like, oh my gosh, like,
yeah.
So hard. And then there are Black people that support Asian people. So it's like, those two things can both exist.
But
if we continue to fall under that trap of this system that has been created to divide us, then yes, that's an outcome that we're going to continue to get, of continuously being divided.
I really love that narrative, and I totally agree with you. And I even think, even within group differences, like as an African immigrant here to the US, there's also that, system that has divided Africans from African Americans, because we tend to always see them through the colors of whatever the media has been, throwing at us for years. I would love to keep talking with you, but our time is far spent. I would like to bring you back to talk more about adoption and adoption trauma, because I really have, some deep burning questions I'd like to ask you.
Yeah.
For next time. But I want to just say thank you so much. I agree with you that assimilation, I actually don't like that word, because it comes from a place of power, like almost like it should be one way. I think it should be both ways. I'm bringing something to the table.
Place of power to make.
That is, I hate the word. I really hate the word. Anytime I hear it, I just want to cringe.
Yeah.
Before you quickly go, where can people find you? And I'm going to put a link to your book. Guys, go get that book. You'll laugh a lot. You can just see just what a spunky soul. And the cover is it cracks me up. You're not the one on the picture, are you?
That is me.
My goodness, looking like a Korean boy.
Hair and the flag are like
the Georgia flag. Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's so cute. You had such cute cheeks. I like, pinching baby's cheeks in a very joking way. Where do people find you?
My mama was feeding me well. She was feeding me well. I like food from my book.
Good food, those grains and
that's right.
Yeah, potatoes and all that stuff. Yeah, you talked about that in your book. Where can people find you quickly before we go?
Yeah, so my website is toomuchsoul.com. Please stay in contact with me. I'm on Instagram under Asian_Southern_Belle. And my book has its own Instagram page, toomuchsoul_book. So thank you so much for having me on. Great.
I have a strong feeling we're going to talk again real soon. I want to say thank you so much for, being a part of it. Well, guys, that was it. Go find her book on Amazon. It's Journey of an Asian Southern Belle. Too much soul. And the soul, there's across that word that is Seoul, as in the capital of Korea. And then Seoul. I mean, that's so punny. It speaks to my soul. No pun intended. Maybe pun intended. All right, guys. I need to get off now. I'm making too many lame jokes. Catch you guys on another episode of the Merciful Podcast. I've been your host, Merciful. All right. 안녕히 계세요. 감사합니다.
Good.
Bye.
Yeah, you're great. I'm not even cry.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was great.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Merciful Podcast. Well, guess what? There's plenty more where that came from. So visit our website at www.mosibyl.com. That is www.mosibyl.com, where you can find hours of other binge-worthy episodes just like this one. And while you're at it, please don't forget to subscribe and leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Podbean, as it encourages other awesome people like you to listen to the podcast as well. We are now officially on Podbean. It has an app. You can catch up on missed episodes and also get a notification when we have new episodes. Do you have a question for our guest, feedback on the episode, or a suggestion for a future guest? Then please get in touch with us by sending us an email at talktomo@mosibyl.com or connect with us via Instagram at the Merciful Podcast. Cannot wait to hear from you. And thank you so much for always listening.